My name is Lauren Mitchell. I'm 30 years old, and if you ask most people in San Diego about me, they would probably say I'm the quiet type, the kind of woman who blends in without trying. I like that. I like that nobody sees the years of work behind the way my life looks now. The degree I earned while working part-time jobs, the small apartment that I bought without a cosigner, the savings account that no one but me has ever put a dollar into. I built my life with spreadsheets and early mornings. Not luck. I don't drive a fancy car. I don't have a dramatic love life. And there are weeks when the most exciting part of my routine is finding a new coffee shop on my way to work. That suits me. What doesn't suit me is the weight of expectation that comes every time my phone lights up with a message from home. Home, for me, is still the desert outside Phoenix. A row of pale houses and sunburned lawns, and a family that has always spoken about duty as if it were the same thing as love. I am the oldest daughter, the one who did everything right. My parents, Carol and Dennis, never said those words out loud, but I learned it young. If something needed fixing, I was the one who knew how to fix it, or at least pay for someone else to. They would tell their friends that I was so responsible, so dependable, and I used to think that was a compliment. It took me years to realize that in our house, dependable just meant available. I have a sister, Madison. She's 2 years younger but has always been treated like the fragile one, like life dealt her a bad hand that everyone else has to hold for her. Every time she made a mess, there was a reason. She lost a job because her boss was cruel. She failed a class because the professor was biased. She got in trouble because the world was unfair. No one in our family ever called it what it was. They just cleaned up after her, and when they ran out of ways to fix things, they turned to me. I was the easy solution. That's what I grew up being. The solution. My life in San Diego is as far as I can get from that role without cutting the cord completely. The ocean is 10 minutes away from where I live, and I go there when I need to remember that it's possible to exist without the constant pull of other people's mistakes. I like the way the city hums, not with gossip, but with its own kind of rhythm. Strangers busy with their own problems. I like that no one here knows Madison's history, or mine, but the distance has never been enough to stop the requests. For years it was money, sometimes advice, sometimes just a demand disguised as a question. I have learned to answer slowly, to choose silence when I can, but every time I drive back to Phoenix and sit at my parents' table, I can feel it waiting in the room like another guest. The unspoken fact that sooner or later they will hand me Madison's life and expect me to carry it. The drive from San Diego to Phoenix is long enough to make a person think about turning around, but I still made it because family tradition says Sunday dinner isn't optional. By the time I pulled into their driveway, the desert sun was just starting to fade, throwing that soft red light over the pale stucco houses. Inside, everything looked exactly like it always has. The same beige walls, the same faint smell of pot roast, my dad half watching a game in the living room while my mom fussed over plates like it was Thanksgiving. Madison was already there, barefoot, slouched on her phone at the dining table, scrolling like she couldn't be bothered to notice me. I said hi anyway. She mumbled something without looking up. That's the rhythm of these dinners. I drive 6 hours for a smile, and she barely looks up from a screen. My mom kissed my cheek, asked about traffic, told me I looked tired. I asked about them and got answers that were polite but thin, the kind of conversation you can tell is just a prelude to something else. We sat down, we passed dishes, and for a while it felt almost normal, like maybe this time they had invited me just because they wanted to see me. It didn't last. I know the signs by now. My mother's smile gets a little too bright. My father goes quiet, and Madison avoids my eyes as if the table is suddenly the most fascinating thing she's ever seen. We had just finished the salad when my mom set down her fork and folded her hands like she was about to pray. "Lauren," she said gently, "your sister has been through a really rough patch lately. We've been talking, and we all agree it's time for her to have a fresh start." I didn't say anything. I just let her keep going because I already knew where this was headed. She's going to stay with you for a while, just until she's back on her feet. It's temporary, and it'll mean so much to her. She said it like it was already decided, like I had been consulted and had enthusiastically agreed. I glanced across the table at Madison. She looked up for half a second, almost smug, and then went back to picking at her food. My dad took a drink of water like he was bracing for a storm. There was a time when I would have said no on the spot, argued about boundaries and fairness and all the things that have never mattered here. This time I smiled. "Of course," I said. "If it helps Madison get back on track, I don't see why not." For a second, the room froze. My mom blinked, caught off guard by how easy it sounded. My dad exhaled like someone had just taken a weight off his shoulders. Madison leaned back in her chair like she had already won. What none of them saw was how still I went after that. How quiet. They thought they'd cornered me into compliance again, but I'd made my decision weeks ago. They just didn't know that the place they imagined Madison moving into doesn't exist anymore. I didn't wake up one day and decide to pull away from them. It happened in pieces, one favor at a time, each one small enough that I could almost convince myself it didn't matter. The first was when Madison was 20 and decided she needed a car to drive to her new job. She didn't have credit, so my parents called me late at night, voices soft with urgency, and asked me to co-sign. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed with the phone pressed to my ear, thinking that it sounded like something a good sister would do. So I did it. 3 months later, she quit that job, stopped making payments, and the letters from the bank came to me. Then it was school. She wanted to turn her life around, she said. I wired the money for tuition because I wanted to believe she could do it, that maybe if she had one thing that went right, she'd finally stand on her own. She lasted a single semester before dropping out. Every time she stumbled, the bill landed at my door. When she was 24, there was the night I got a call from my dad telling me Madison had been arrested. It was a DUI, and it wasn't her first, but he swore this time was different. This time she had learned her lesson. They asked me to pay for a lawyer because they couldn't afford it. I paid. It was more than I had in savings, and I maxed out a credit card to do it. She didn't thank me. A year later, she did it again, and that time when I said no, my mother called me cold, said I didn't understand what it meant to worry for someone you love. It wasn't just Madison either. When the housing market crashed and my dad lost his job, they called and I wired $2,000 without even thinking about it. I wanted to help because that's what you do for family. That's what I'd been taught. I didn't expect balloons or applause, but I thought there would be gratitude, some recognition that I was holding everything together while they fell apart. Instead, I learned that when you always say yes, people stop seeing it as a gift. It becomes background noise, like electricity or running water, something they can count on without thinking. Over time, I realized that my place in the family wasn't as a daughter or a sister. I was a backup plan. My usefulness became my identity, and the more I gave, the more they expected. That's the kind of pattern that sneaks up on you until one day you wake up and realize that every problem in someone else's life has become your own. And when I tried to pull back, to say no, they made me feel like I was betraying them. That was the moment it finally sank in. They didn't see me, not really. They just saw a safety net that would always hold, and I decided I couldn't live like that anymore. I started planning the move long before anyone in my family guessed there was something to plan for. Selling my condo wasn't a dramatic act. It was a quiet one. I made a few phone calls, met with a realtor on my lunch breaks, signed papers in a tidy office with soft music playing in the background. No one in Phoenix knew about it because I didn't tell them. It wasn't revenge. It was the only way I could think of to finally create a boundary that they couldn't argue with. By the time that Sunday dinner rolled around, my old address was already a memory. I had moved into a small apartment in another part of San Diego, somewhere no one would think to look, a place with just enough space for me and no room for anyone else's baggage. The walls were bare, the kitchen simple, but for the first time I could breathe. It was the first home I'd had that felt like it belonged to me alone. After dinner that night, the texts started almost immediately. My mother sent the first one, cheerful and certain. "We'll bring Madison's mattress on Saturday morning. Dad's loading the boxes Friday night." I stared at it and didn't reply. The next day there was another. "She's so excited to finally have her own space. You'll see how much this helps." Then came the one that almost made me laugh out loud. "Don't worry about cleaning. Madison says she'll bring her own dishes so she won't be a burden." The idea of Madison ever scrubbing a plate was so absurd that I had to set my phone face down on the table. They made plans like they always do, speaking to a version of me that doesn't exist anymore. A version that never says no. I stayed silent and let them make their arrangements. And in the meantime, I kept living my life in the place they didn't know about. By the end of the week, their certainty had grown roots. My mom was texting me every day with updates, asking if I wanted them to buy new sheets for Madison's bed, if there was room in my garage for a bike she wasn't sure worked anymore, if I could clear out some closet space. Each message assumed my door was already open, that I was waiting there ready to make their lives easier. I didn't correct them. I didn't remind them that no one had asked me what I wanted before they decided to move her in. I didn't owe them explanations anymore. Instead, I waited. On Saturday morning, I made sure to be out of my apartment early. I took my coffee to go, walked by the ocean, and let the sun warm my face while I imagined them standing outside a door that no longer led to me. It wasn't cruelty. It was the only way I knew to finally get free. The first call came just after 10 in the morning while I was sitting on a bench overlooking the ocean, a paper cup of coffee in my hands and nowhere else I needed to be. I let it ring. Then another came, and another, until I finally answered on the fourth try. My mother's voice came through sharp and breathless, not the sweet rehearsed tone she used at dinner, but something brittle. "Lauren," she said, "there's a man here who says he lives in your condo. He says you don't live here anymore. What's going on?" For a moment I just listened to the wind and the sound of waves behind me, and then I said, calm as anything, "I sold that place weeks ago." Silence stretched on the other end of the line. I could picture them standing there with boxes on the sidewalk, the desert sun pressing down on them, everything they had planned collapsing in an instant. My dad's voice cut in from somewhere close to the phone. "You lied to us. You said she could move in." I said if it helped Madison. I didn't see why not. I never said where. I thought that would be the end of it, but by late afternoon there was a knock on my new door. 3 sharp raps that made the walls seem to vibrate. Through the peephole I saw them, my mom, my dad, and Madison, red-faced and sweating, the trunk of their SUV crammed with boxes. I opened the door halfway, keeping my voice even. "You found me," I said. My mom's face tightened. "We tried calling," she said. "We didn't think you'd actually do this. You said she could stay with you." My dad's voice rose behind her, angry now. "We're standing here with all her things, and you're acting like a stranger. This is your sister, Lauren." Madison stepped forward then, arms crossed over her chest. "This is petty," she said. "You always act like you're better than everyone else. But this is cruel." I tilted my head and said, "You packed up your life and drove across the city to move into a place you didn't even confirm existed. That's not cruelty. That's entitlement." The shouting started then, my dad trying to push the door open while my mom begged me to be reasonable. Madison's voice cracked as she accused me of abandoning her. and all I did was step back, pick up my phone, and dial. "What are you doing?" my mom asked, but I didn't answer until the operator's voice came on. "Yes," I said. "I need to report trespassing. There are people at my apartment who refuse to leave. They're not on the lease." By the time the police car arrived 10 minutes later, none of them could look at me. The officer listened, calm and steady, and then told them they had to leave. My dad argued, my mom cried, and Madison just stood there shaking, but eventually they picked up their boxes and walked back to the car. I closed the door without another word. For the first time in years, the silence felt like mine. The next morning, my phone lit up with notifications before I had even made coffee. Texts from numbers I didn't recognize, angry messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to since high school, and a public post from my mother that had already started to collect comments like flies. 3 paragraphs about how I had turned my back on my family, how Madison had nowhere to go, how a good sister would never do something so heartless. There was a picture of Madison as a little girl, pigtails and missing teeth, the kind of photo meant to make strangers feel pity. People I hadn't heard from in a decade were chiming in to call me selfish, spoiled, cold. I sat there on the edge of my bed and scrolled through every word. And instead of getting angry, I felt something loosen inside me, like a knot coming undone. It wasn't new, not really. It was just louder than usual. I opened my laptop and started to gather what I had kept for years, not because I ever thought I would need proof, but because I couldn't bear to forget. Screenshots of transfers, the ones that kept the lights on in their house when Dad was unemployed, the copy of my name on Madison's car loan, and the letter from the bank when the payments stopped, the invoice from the lawyer I paid for her first DUI, the tuition receipt from the semester she never finished. I arranged them in order, a timeline of every time I had said yes when I should have said no. And then I wrote a single sentence at the bottom. I didn't abandon my family. I just stopped volunteering for emotional debt. I posted it all, not for revenge and not to embarrass them, but because I was tired of carrying a story that was only ever told from one side. Then I closed the laptop, turned my phone to silent, and let the storm run without me. That evening, the apartment was quiet in a way I hadn't known I needed. No buzzing notifications, no raised voices, no weight pressing down on me except the familiar weight of my own body sinking into the couch. Outside, the sun was going down over the city, the sky the color of soft orange glass. I made tea, not to help me sleep, but just to hold something warm in my hands. On the balcony, the air was cool, salt-heavy from the ocean, and I could hear someone walking their dog on the street below, the leash clicking against a collar. A neighbor I barely know waved when she saw me, and I waved back. It was such a small thing, but it felt more real than every sacrifice I had made out of obligation. Inside, I turned off the lights one by one until all that was left was the steady hum of the fridge. For the first time in years, there was nothing left for me to do but sit in the dark and breathe. I didn't disappear. They just started telling the story like I had, because that version made sense to them. Let them. I am still here, just not where they want me to be. For the first time in my life, the story is mine, and this time I am the one writing it.